Unexpected four-engine bombers, designed to devastate German factories at 25,000 feet, would end up hunting Japanese barges at just 50 feet over the muddy rivers of New Guinea. The deafening roar of the Pratt & Whitney R-1830 engines echoed through the tropical treetops as B-24 Liberator pilots executed maneuvers that defied every principle of the aircraft's design. This radical transformation of strategic bombers into river predators represents one of the most audacious tactical adaptations of World War II. The desperate need to cut Japanese supply lines forced engineers and pilots to completely reimagine the role of these aerial giants, creating a new form of warfare that combined surgical precision with suicidal courage. The consolidated B-24 Liberator weighed 65,000 pounds when fully loaded, a colossal mass never intended to dance among tropical mountains. Its four engines generated 4,800 combined horsepower, propelling the aircraft through European skies in ordered formations towards distant industrial targets. The spacious cockpit accommodated a crew of 10 men, each specialized in their role within the strategic war machine. The long, narrow wings provided efficiency at altitude, while the tricycle landing gear facilitated operations on paved runways. No one at Consolidated Aircraft Corporation imagined these characteristics would be tested to the extreme limits of aeronautical physics over mosquito-infested jungles. The 110-foot wingspan made every low-altitude maneuver an exercise in deadly precision. Skip bombing was born out of frustration with conventional bombing against moving naval targets. The technique required pilots to fly at suicidally low altitudes, dropping bombs that skipped across the water's surface, like stones thrown by children. Military physicists calculated approach angles, impact velocities, and ricochet trajectories with mathematical precision. 500-pound bombs with delayed fuses allowed aircraft to escape before the explosion. Initial tests in the Gulf of Mexico revealed devastating potential, but also extreme risks. Pilots needed to maintain a constant speed of 220 miles at just 50 feet of altitude, a margin of error measured in fractions of a second. The water transformed into both an ally and an enemy simultaneously, offering lethal precision while threatening to swallow any aircraft that lost altitude for an instant. New Guinea's geography created a perfect aquatic labyrinth for clandestine Japanese operations. Winding rivers cut through 178,000 square miles of impenetrable jungle, connecting coastal bases to mountainous inland positions. The Sepik River stretched for 700 miles through the territory, its muddy waters hiding hundreds of barges loaded with ammunition, food, and fresh troops. Secondary channels formed a 2,000-mile network of waterways, impossible for Allied ground forces to patrol. Torrential rains turned streams into torrents, while the dry season exposed treacherous sandbanks. The Japanese adapted civilian vessels for military transport, camouflaging them with local vegetation during the day. Allied intelligence estimated 500 vessels operating simultaneously, moving 10,000 tons of supplies monthly through this vital artery. Colonel Paul "Pappy" Gunn observed the first adaptation attempts with professional skepticism. A combat veteran with 15 years of military aviation experience, Gunn commanded the 3rd Attack Group when orders came to experiment with B-24s on low-altitude missions. "These birds were made to fly high and straight," he murmured to his navigator, Lieutenant James Morrison, as they examined proposed modifications. Engineers removed unnecessary equipment, reducing weight by 3,000 pounds to improve maneuverability. Defensive armament was reconfigured, concentrating 50-caliber machine guns in frontal positions for strafing attacks. Morrison calculated that every pound saved meant 2 additional feet of safety altitude during shallow approaches. Gunn authorized preliminary tests with volunteer crews, knowing he was asking men to redefine the limits of the possible. The first experimental mission occurred on March 15, 1943, when 6 B-24s from the 90th Bombardment Group took off from Port Moresby Base at 0530 hours. Captain Robert Dutch Schultz piloted the lead aircraft, Yankee Doodle, loaded with 8 500-pound bombs modified for skip bombing. Navigation through 200 miles of jungle required absolute precision, using geographical landmarks and timing calculations to locate river targets. Schultz later described the rising tension as the formation descended from 8,000 to 500 feet, then to the fatal 50 feet required for effective skip bombing. Co-pilot Lieutenant Mike O'Brien obsessively monitored instruments, calling out altitude every 5 seconds. 50 feet and holding, O'Brien shouted over the roar of the engines as the first target appeared. An 80-foot barge loaded with Japanese medical supplies. The moment of release demanded perfect synchronization between pilot, bombardier, and pure physics. Staff Sergeant Bombardier Tony Ricci adjusted the Norden bomb sight for low-altitude calculations, an adaptation never envisioned by the equipment's designers. Schultz kept Yankee Doodle level at 220 mph as the barge rapidly grew in the windshield. Doors open, Ricci announced, activating release systems. Tropical wind created additional turbulence, forcing constant corrections on the yoke. Bombs away! Ricci shouted 300 yards from the target. 4 500-pound projectiles left the bay in a 0.2-second sequence. Their trajectories calculated for water impact 50 yards ahead of the enemy vessel. Schultz violently pulled the yoke, gaining altitude as bombs skipped across the surface like giant bullets, piercing the barge's hull below the waterline before exploding internally. Japanese reaction was immediate and fierce. Type 96, 25mm anti-aircraft positions emerged from elaborate camouflage along the banks, pouring 200 projectiles per minute onto the attacking formations. Lieutenant Colonel Hiroshi Yamamoto, commander of the river defenses, had anticipated conventional air attacks, but did not expect heavy bombers operating at fighter altitudes. His radio orders crossed military frequencies. All posts concentrated fire on the large aircraft. Type 92-7. 7mm machine guns joined the din, creating curtains of crossfire over strategic river points. Schultz felt impacts on Yankee Doodle's fuselage as anti-aircraft shell fragments pierced the aluminum. Tail Gunner Staff Sergeant Eddie Kowalski reported 3 barges ablaze and 2 anti-aircraft positions silenced, but also counted 47 holes in the aircraft during post-mission inspection. Technical adaptations evolved rapidly as missions multiplied. Engineers from the 42nd Squadron installed an additional 800 pounds of armor in vital areas, protecting fuel tanks and hydraulic systems against fragments. Fuel system modifications included self-sealing tanks and auxiliary pumps to maintain pressure during extreme maneuvers. Flight instruments received special shock absorbers to withstand low-altitude vibrations. Captain Engineer Frank Wrench Williams supervised the installation of improved cooling systems, necessary for prolonged operations in humid tropical climates. R-1830 engines operated 200 degrees hotter at low altitude, requiring modifications to oil radiators. Williams calculated that each hour of low-level flight was equivalent to 5 hours of normal wear, forcing maintenance overhauls after each mission. Crew training transformed into an exercise in extreme survival. Flight simulators were modified to replicate skip bombing conditions, but nothing fully prepared pilots for the reality of flying heavy bombers at 50 feet. Colonel Gunn established a specific 40-hour flight program, starting with approaches at 500 feet and gradually descending. Pilots practiced dropping inert bombs against floating targets in the Gulf of Papua, developing instincts for precise timing. Navigators learned landmark recognition at extreme speed, identifying targets in fractions of a second. Gunners trained in engaging ground targets during low-level passes, a skill never taught in strategic bombing schools. The accident rate during training reached 12%, forcing constant revisions to safety protocols. Intelligence revealed that the Japanese transported 15,000 tons of supplies monthly through New Guinea's rivers, sustaining 40,000 isolated troops inland. Intelligence Major Sarah Chen analyzed reconnaissance photographs, identifying movement patterns and concentration points. Barges operated primarily during dawn and dusk, taking advantage of low visibility to avoid aerial detection. Chen discovered that larger vessels carried artillery ammunition, while smaller barges transported medical supplies and food. Radio intercepts revealed delivery schedules coordinated with Japanese ground operations. Chen calculated that a 60% disruption of river traffic would force a Japanese withdrawal from advanced positions within 30 days. Her analyses identified 12 choke points where concentrated attacks would maximize operational impact. The mission of April 8, 1943, demonstrated the devastating potential of the new tactic. 18 B-24s attacked a convoy of 23 barges on the Markham River, loaded with 400 tons of ammunition, destined for the Japanese offensive in Wau. Captain Schultz led the first wave, followed by staggered formations at 2-minute intervals. Bombers approached at 25 feet of altitude, their bombs skipping with lethal precision. Secondary explosions of ammunition created 300-foot columns of fire, visible from 20 miles away. Lieutenant O'Brien documented the destruction of 19 vessels in 12 minutes of combat. Allied losses were limited to one severely damaged B-24, forced to make an emergency landing. Japanese prisoners captured later revealed that the loss of this specific convoy delayed the planned offensive by 6 weeks, demonstrating the disproportionate strategic impact of the operation. The development of specialized bombs accelerated as the tactic proved effective. Ordnance engineers created 1,000-pound projectiles with variable delayed fuses, allowing deeper penetration before explosion. 250-pound incendiary bombs were adapted for skip bombing, creating devastating fires on wooden vessels. Lieutenant Colonel of Ordnance David "Boom" Patterson supervised fragmentation tests, developing projectiles that exploded above the water to maximize damage to exposed crews. Patterson calculated that fragmentation bombs increased effectiveness against personnel by 300%, while armor-piercing projectiles ensured the destruction of armored vessels. American factories produced 50,000 modified bombs, specifically for skip bombing operations, representing an investment of $15 million in specialized armament. Night operations introduced additional complexity to skip bombing missions. Instrument navigation at low altitude over tropical jungle tested the limits of available technology. Lieutenant Navigator Robert "Maps" Anderson developed techniques using radio beacons and timing calculations to locate river targets in the darkness. Pilots relied on barometric altimeters calibrated for tropical conditions, where pressure variations created inaccurate readings. Anderson installed modified formation lights, allowing coordination between aircraft without alerting Japanese defenses. The first successful night mission occurred on April 22nd, when 8 B-24s destroyed a convoy of 15 barges with no Allied losses. The Japanese, unable to track night approaches, lost the advantage of their prepared anti-aircraft positions. Japanese countermeasures evolved rapidly in response to the devastating attacks. Colonel Yamamoto ordered the installation of 200 additional anti-aircraft positions along 500 miles of main rivers. Barges received improvised armor using steel plates recovered from sunken ships. Camouflage systems were enhanced with special nets that mimicked floating vegetation. Yamamoto implemented random movement schedules, eliminating predictable patterns that facilitated Allied attack planning. Vessels began operating individually instead of in convoys, reducing losses per single attack. Artillery positions were equipped with special tracer ammunition, creating intimidating visual barriers. Despite these measures, Japanese effectiveness decreased by 40% due to the need to disperse defensive resources. Coordination with P-38. Lightning fighters created devastating combined tactics. Fighters attacked first, suppressing anti-aircraft defenses with 20mm cannon bursts and 50-caliber machine guns. B-24s followed immediately, taking advantage of the confusion to execute skip bombing without interference. Fighter Major Tom "Lightning" Rodriguez developed communication protocols allowing precise coordination between different aircraft types. Rodriguez calculated that prior suppression of defenses increased bomber survival by 60%. P-38s also provided escort during withdrawal, protecting damaged B-24s against Japanese interceptors. This interarm cooperation demonstrated significant tactical evolution, transforming individual attacks into orchestrated operations with multiple layers of protection. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders exceeded material damage. Soldiers reported growing terror at the sound of B-24 engines approaching at low altitude. Captured diaries described roaring demons that appeared without warning among the trees. Staff Sergeant Kenji Tanaka wrote, "We cannot sleep. They come when we least expect them, destroying everything." The morale of riverine troops plummeted as attacks intensified. Japanese commanders reported desertions increasing by 25% among river transport units. Operational effectiveness drastically decreased when barge crews began abandoning vessels at the first sound of aircraft engines. This psychological deterioration multiplied the tactical effectiveness of the attacks, creating operational paralysis that exceeded physical destruction. Damage analysis revealed surprising precision of the skip bombing technique. Post-attack reconnaissance photographs showed a 75% hit rate against river targets, compared to 20% for conventional high-altitude bombing. Skipped bombs penetrated hulls below the waterline, ensuring sinking even with smaller explosives. Intelligence Major Chen documented the destruction of 340 vessels in 3 months of intensive operations. Cost analysis revealed that each destroyed barge cost $2,000 in ammunition and fuel, compared to $50,000 in lost Japanese supplies. This impressive economic efficiency justified the expansion of operations to other Pacific theaters. Chen calculated a return on investment of 25.1, making skip bombing one of the most cost-effective tactics of the war. Structural modifications to the B-24s reached impressive sophistication as operations expanded. Engineers installed low-altitude navigation systems, including primitive radar altimeters for overwater operations. Crew seats received special shock absorbers to reduce fatigue during prolonged flights in low-altitude turbulence. Communication systems were armored against electromagnetic interference from nearby explosions. Captain Williams supervised the installation of auxiliary fuel tanks, extending operational range to 1,800 miles. Modifications included air purification systems for operations in humid tropical environments. Each modified B-24 cost an additional $25,000, but demonstrated tripled operational capabilities compared to the original configuration. Training evolved to include simulation of extreme combat conditions. Instructors created aerial obstacle courses using balloons and cables to replicate Japanese anti-aircraft defenses. Pilots practiced evasive maneuvers at 50 feet of altitude, developing the reflexes necessary for combat survival. Bombardiers trained in dropping on moving targets, using radio-controlled boats to simulate moving barges. Gunners practiced engaging multiple targets during high-speed, low-level passes. The training program expanded to 80 hours, including 20 hours of specialized night flight. The accident rate during training decreased to 3%, as techniques were refined. Graduates demonstrated skip bombing proficiency comparable to fighter pilots in air-to-air combat. Operations expanded to include attacks against Japanese port infrastructure. B-24s attacked docks, cranes, and fuel facilities using adapted skip bombing techniques. Bombs skipped off concrete surfaces before penetrating structures, causing devastating internal damage. Attacks against Rabaul port destroyed 60% of cargo capacity in a single operation. Japanese engineers needed 6 months to repair the damage, delaying crucial logistical operations. This versatility demonstrated the tactic's adaptability beyond its original river targets. Allied commanders recognized the potential for application in multiple operational scenarios. From coastal attacks to the destruction of fortified bridges, the development of anti-skip bombing tactics by the Japanese forced Allied counter-adaptations. Underwater nets were installed in main rivers to prematurely detonate bombs. Barges received double hulls to withstand underwater explosions. Anti-aircraft positions were repositioned to create crossfire fields over predictable approach points. Colonel Yamamoto implemented an early warning system using observers in camouflaged towers. These measures reduced the initial effectiveness of the attacks by 30%. Allied pilots responded by developing variable approach routes and multi-angle release techniques. The war of measures and countermeasures demonstrated continuous tactical evolution, forcing constant innovation from both sides. Post-war analysis revealed that skip bombing operations reduced Japanese logistical capacity in New Guinea by 70%. Military historian Dr. James Patterson documented the destruction of 800 vessels and 25,000 tons of supplies during 18 months of operations. Japanese forces were forced to abandon advanced positions due to lack of resupply. Planned offensives were cancelled when ammunition and food did not reach frontline units. Patterson calculated that skip bombing accelerated Allied victory in New Guinea by 8 months, saving an estimated 15,000 American and Australian lives. The total cost of operations was $12 million, compared to an estimated $200 million for a prolonged ground campaign. This strategic efficiency validated investment in innovative aerial tactics. Veterans of skip bombing operations carried vivid memories of the radical transformation they witnessed. Captain Schultz, promoted to major after 47 successful missions, described the evolution. "We started as strategic bombers and ended up as river hunters." His words captured the essence of the tactical adaptation that redefined air warfare in the Pacific. Lieutenant O'Brien, a veteran navigator of 52 missions, observed, "We learned that war does not respect instruction manuals." Staff Sergeant Kowalski, a gunner who survived 3 forced landings, summarized, "We did the impossible because it was necessary." These men transformed heavy bombers into surgical precision weapons, demonstrating that innovation is born from absolute necessity and the courage to challenge established conventions. The transformation of B-24 Liberator strategic bombers into lethal river hunters represents one of military aviation's most audacious tactical adaptations. Pilots who took off to destroy German factories found themselves hunting Japanese barges among tropical treetops, completely redefining the limits of what was possible. This tactical metamorphosis was born out of desperate necessity and flourished through American ingenuity, creating a form of warfare that combined mathematical precision with individual courage. Skip bombing proved that military innovation emerges when ordinary soldiers face extraordinary challenges, turning limitations into advantages through determination and creativity. The roar of R-1830 engines echoing through New Guinea's rivers announced a new era in air warfare, where adaptability surpassed original design and necessity redefined the impossible.